Hey guys, how's it going? It's Everseen here. So I know for like the past week and stuff on stream, we've been doing some PoB type things, trying to figure out what we want to play for League Start. It's been between Shield Crush Gladiator and some form of Juggernaut, whether it was Sunder or whatever. I didn't really want to play Bone Shatter just because of the attack speed nerfs and stuff. And it was this build. So this is the Earthquake Chieftain Bleed build. So bleed is actually going to be really good for slams. Just hit-based slams are okay, but like ailment-based slams are going to be crazy. And the whole influence behind doing this, opposed to other slams, is because Earthquake does the Aftershock, and Aftershock does insane more damage. So Aftershock deals 180% more damage with hits and ailments. Key thing to pay attention to is more and not increased. Anytime there is more in the game, it is always like a multiplicative huge damage buff. So like things like precise technique for 40% more attack damage, right? Which this node gives you a lot of damage whenever you're playing attack based builds. This is whatever I would like. I would always pick this on like playing Bone Shatter Jug and stuff. So the whole premise of the build is that we are using Earthquake's kind of damage modifier to really heighten our damage potential for bleed. So, you know, it hits once with the initial hit, and then the Aftershock is like a huge bleed that'll get inflicted. So once we get like an aggravated bleed on an Aftershock too, it's going to be really nice. And basically the whole premise is we're going to be using Bleed Mastery. It's 25% chance to aggravate bleeding on targets you hit with exerted attacks. So this is obviously going to be good. Plus this is 35% chance, right? So we have a pretty big chance at aggravating bleeds, so we're just going to roll with that. Okay, so why go Chieftain, right? I mean, there's totally better classes. You could go Juggernaut to be more tanky, whatever. I want to go Chieftain because it makes the Exarch fight trivial. So when you have a lot of max res in the Exarch fight, his balls do significantly less damage. And I'll probably have like only like 84, maybe 83 max res or whatever, right? Like I'm not going to have crazy max res, so I'll probably use like a Ruby Flask, and then, I mean, Ancestral Call is basically where we're getting like 6 max res, so we're kind of relying on that a lot for this build. But the Exarch fight is pretty free, so it means Eater and Exarch are super easy, right? And Chieftain has super early progression for gearing. Like all you need is fire resistance on gear, and then you have like your resistance is capped. And then the infinite Warcry buff effect thing, like I'm gonna take in Crew Lab. Basically, like Enduring Cry will still give like 10% life regen, which is huge in campaign. And when you have maximum resistances that are like close to 85, 90, like life regen and that max res like goes hand in hand. Like you're mitigating, but like you're also regenerating a huge amount. So you've got pretty decent sustain on a Chieftain. And yeah, like Chieftain has a 7 link. Every other build that's going to do bleed doesn't have a 7 link. So I'm more apt to play Chieftain than I am to play other ascendancies, especially because Chieftain actually like gets pretty tanky like later on in the game. So yeah, and the max res is also nice, you know, getting max fire res, we get max res for everything, right? So pretty comfortable overall. I think the progression is going to be super easy with Chieftain, just because, you know, you're using Sunder with Intimidating Cry, and it's just pretty simple, straightforward. All right, so let's go over kind of like the rotation, just so you guys can get a feel for what the build's going to be like. Basically, we're going to be leaping around. If you leap into a pack, you have Frostblink to get out immediately, which is nice. And you can also just traverse with the Frostblink and Leap Slam if you wish. Casting 3 Warcries is pretty much mandatory on cooldown, so whenever they come up, you're casting Warcries. Then in between, you're doing slams. So I have 4 slams for Exerts from Seismic. It's going to be much more next patch. And then, yeah. I have vulnerability. I did have vulnerability on self-cast. I may do this in the beginning, not sure yet. But you can use Battle Mage's Cry, which is actually really good with vulnerability, and you'll also get the additional Warcry buff from Overexertion. Doing 4 Warcries on a boss, though, seems like kind of annoying, but I'll just jump in a map and I'll show you guys how it works. So basically, we cast Battle Mage's Cry, and everything gets hit with vulnerability for the amount of exerts you have. So right now I have 3 exerts, 2, 1, and then now I don't apply it anymore, right? And you can see the exerts in the bottom right when I'm kind of explaining. So you do 3 Warcries, and then a 4th, sorry, and then you have vulnerability on hit. So you can go that route if you want. I think that might be what I do as like an endgame setup, but for the immediate future, I'll probably do the vulnerability self-cast. Alrighty, so the one thing I hate about doing build guides and about showing progression or whatever, like your build, is people just witch hunt you immediately, telling you, oh, you're a PoB warrior, you got fucking 18 million damage, whatever. We are going to reverse engineer this build so you can see exactly what's giving me damage and why it's giving me damage. And if you feel like anything is unethical, by all means, cool. But this line is true. This is framework for my build. I am not a fucking build guru. I am not the best fucking build creator on this goddamn platform, giving you the most constructive fucking information, whatever. Be cool, man. Have fun. Learn from it. Do something different. Give constructive criticism. We're all good, right? So anyway, let's move on. So auto exertion in the PoB is going to be overexertion, right? And Warcry is, you know, giving us more, 64% more damage. We've added that into the config. That is kind of like the baseline for where the config goes. There's only that amount of damage added, and that's it. I added a bleed tincture. You can decide if you want to do this or not. I think bleed tinctures will actually be good in the end game. It's just whether or not you want to give up a like defensive flask slot for a tincture. Things to take out to reverse engineer the DPS or tankiness of the build. This is all the DPS stuff. This is all the defensive stuff, right? And I'll be taking Fizz as elemental on the body armor for an Eldritch Implicit if I can. So we'll only get a little bit more tanky, right? And Fizz's Ellie, obviously, on a Chieftain is going to be super strong. So let's kind of go through everything all together. So obviously, Exerted, Boosted, Calc Mode, switch from max hit to average, cool, unchecked, place banner, switch Pride from max effect to initial effect. If you don't know, Pride, the way it works, like, has like 20%, let's just say, initial, and then like 40% more Fizz damage for max effect, like just as an example. I don't remember what the numbers are. We'll look at them. Is the enemy moving is to simulate the aggravated bleed. Obviously, we don't have 100% uptime on our aggravated bleed, so we're just doing this to calculate max hit, basically. And Earthquake is always going to aggravate on our Aftershock because the first hit hits, inflicts bleed, and then the Aftershock is going to also inflict bleed. And the initial hit is going to have a low bleed, though, and the Aftershock is going to aggravate that low bleed. But when you hit again, now the Aftershock is going to be like one of those bleeds, because the way that bleed works is it will take 1, 2, 3 because of 2 Earthquake attacks, right? So 1 and 1. So initial, Aftershock, and then initial, Aftershock again, right? So how it's going to work is it's going to store that Aftershock bleed as a big bleed. And then once we hit again with another Aftershock, it's going to aggravate that big bleed, right? So that's kind of how I understand it to work. If you guys know how bleed works better than me, by all means, let me know in the comments, because I definitely would like some help with it. It's kind of my first time playing like a really like in-depth bleed build, trying to figure out where the damage is and stuff. Yeah. So another thing too is you can take off Frenzy Endurance charges just to see the max hit, turn off Immortal Call. The Growth Code Pantheon is 5% additional PDR is what I'm using, right? So anyway, we'll go through the configs, and it'll show you like in real time how it's kind of working. So we can take Frenzy charges off. We might not have Frenzy charge uptime on a boss, right? So that's kind of ethical in that sense. I'm trying to like keep this totally ethical for you guys so you understand the perspective and whether or not you actually want to play this build. Another thing too is like with everything up, right? With everything, we only have 2.4 million DPS. A lot of people see the 18 million damage and they think that is their DPS. No. A bleed, how it inflicts is it's 2.4 million DPS because in the bleed portion, we have a duration of 7.39 seconds. So it will do 2.4 million over this amount of seconds on a max hit. This is the biggest hit you can possibly get. Obviously, we're going to be fishing for max hits when we're hitting over and over and over and over again, right? So the chances of us hitting a max hit, it's going to be a little bit of ramp time, but we're going to get the full extent of a bleed. So 18 million damage, right? Which is what we want and is what's good. So configuration, we'll go back. Max hit, you could say, you know, the hits aren't always going to be exerted. And you might be right, because Seismic only gives us so many, and we're using Ancestral and Enduring Cry, which don't really give us exerts. So you can go for Intimidating Cry instead, and Intimidating Cry is actually going to give you better damage because it's like double damage, right? So it's going to give you bigger bleeds. So that's something that I'm trying to figure out. In the min-max portion of the build, it will definitely drop Ancestral Cry, and it will pick up intimidating cry, because we just get much more exerts and they do more damage, right? So we're pretty much going to only be exerting when we're attacking. So you can turn this off. Obviously our damage goes down, right? So max hit bleed DPS goes down about 800k, right? So this is on an average hit. So in addition, we want to take banner off, because banner is not going to be placed all the time. And then pride effect, we can put initial effect, and then see our bleed DPS is more like, you know, 1,000,000 now. So we can take off frenzy charges, it goes down even more. And have you killed recently? I mean, sure, we can take that off. Have you been hit recently? This is just for the PDR on the Pantheon. You can take this off. I don't care about it right now. Have I used a Warcry recently? Yes, it doesn't do anything. And then number of Warcries, we can put this down to 0 if we want to pseudo give us like a tiny bit less damage. Doesn't really do much, so we might as well, like, we're always going to be Warcrying. Another thing too is the enemy moving. So this is on a regular bleed without the enemy moving, without it being aggravated, is going to be around 300,000 bleed DPS, right? So that's what you got to keep in mind when you're kind of going for this build, is that you don't really start out with your full bleed initially. You got to like kind of scale into it by hitting multiple times and managing your Warcries correctly so that you're exerting when you're doing it. Is the enemy taunted? We could say no, it isn't, and it goes down even further. So let's turn some of this stuff back on. Is the enemy moving? We're going to go for a max hit, obviously. We're going to use frenzy charges. We're going to do banner, and we're also going to do maximum pride. And then I think there's something else I'm missing. Have I killed recently? Sure, brings us up. So now, when we're saying this is our bleed DPS for a max hit, what we want to do is we want to take off enemy moving. So the way that bleed's going to work in 3.25 is there is going to be an initial bleed, but there will also be simultaneously an aggravation portion of the bleed. So anytime we're doing is the enemy moving and we uncheck it, this is to pseudo like give an example of what like an initial bleed would be on a target if we had everything lined up. So like our second aftershock or whatever is going to inflict this type of bleed at a very max hit, right? So this is kind of like just to simulate a little bit on how aggravated bleed works. And then when we hit an aggravation on a bleed, we're going to be doing kind of this in addition. So it's going to be more like 24 mil damage at full everything, right? And that's how I understand it, at least. Like it'll be the regular portion of bleed, and it'll also be this moving portion, which is like a double damage sort of thing, right? So yeah, we're going to be just fishing for max bleeds is kind of the whole idea with this build. But, you know, if you're hitting like an 18 million bleed on a boss, like, you know, 7 seconds a boss is dead, like, I think that's pretty good. Damage uptime is pretty good. You can do 2.4 million damage on other builds, but you're not going to have as much DPS uptime because, yeah, I mean, you got to dodge mechanics and stuff, right? So anyway, that's kind of me trying to be ethical with this stuff. Always do Guardian Pinnacle boss because that's most of the time you're going to calculate damage and it'd be worthwhile. Obviously, regular map bosses and regular trash mobs and maps are going to be much weaker, and you're going to do more damage. So that's why we do Guardian Pinnacle, because we want to see against these big bosses, how much damage are we actually going to have, right? I think as well, I'm going to go for Girthkill Pantheon. I'm going to go for Brine King for the freeze immunity, and then I'm going to try and get chill immunity on boots from Betrayal. You can... The miner's kind of up to you. Like, I'm going to do Girthkill at first, because I think fizz damage is going to be hard to mitigate. And then also Garukhan is really nice because you're going to get 60% reduced effective shock. This is probably what I'm going to go to like eventually. Just because when you do the reduced effective shock and you get there's an Eldritch implicit for reduced effective shock as well. I think I put it on, yeah, I put it on the helmet. So reduced effective shock, we don't need reduced mana cost of attacks and whatever. Physical damage taken recouped his life is kind of nice too, because, you know, obviously physical damage that we're going to be kind of worried about this league. But yeah, like we're going to be doing pretty much almost 100% reduced effective shock, so it's not going to be that bad. It's obviously going to be something that can hurt you, but I don't think it's going to be terrible. If you guys have any suggestions on this, definitely let me know. But I think Girthkill is nice early on just because of this fizz damage reduction you get from it. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. Right, so I want to take a few, you know, this is probably going to take quite a bit to go over. I'm just going to try and do the progression really quick just to show you guys sort of what's the way of leveling this build. Basically, I took, you know, the POB I made for the Marauder run that I made based on Waza's speed run. So some things have changed, some things really haven't changed. I think most of your power is going to rely in Intimidating Cry when you're leveling and getting an additional exert to do double damage on basically 3 attacks, right? So it starts out the same, and it goes, you know, Act 1, same kind of deal. We want to take this so we can use Frost Blink because we need that intelligence, right? Then Act 2, we're trying to get Resolute Technique as fast as we can because then that means we never miss a melee attack, which is big damage. You can take this Life Mastery or you cannot take it if you want. I'm going to play Hardcore, so I'm probably just going to take it just because it's 30 health for 1 point. It's pretty worth. And then Act 3 is when we get our first lab. We're going to take, you know, the fire resistance one, so now we don't really have to worry too much about resistances. We just craft fire resistance on stuff, and we basically are capped. So after, you know, grabbing RT, you want to head down, you want to grab this axe wheel, and you want to grab this mastery for increased damage while in blood stance. So we're going to use blood and sand, and we're going to use the war banner, which you'll still use somewhat the same. You'll drop it on bosses for damage. And then we're going to use whatever the other aura is. I think it's Vitality. I'll go over the skills as well, but now let's just go over the tree. So, yeah. Blood Stance is by default as well, by the way. So if you're not even using Blood and Sand, you can still get 30% increased damage for 1 point. So on Marauder progression, taking this point is mandatory in my eyes. You want this point for sure. And then I'm opting to go for the increased damage on exerts and also an additional exert because I want to take advantage on a hit-based leveling build that we use Intimidating Cry as much as we can for most of our big slams. So Intimidating Cry, if you don't know, is actually the only Warcry which doubles damage on exerts, if I can find it here. So Act 1 gems will go Intimidating Cry. So we're also going to get move speed now from the buff. So that's kind of nice for campaign. And if you want to be a little bit speedy, then you can definitely do this. But yeah, exerts do double damage. So if we're getting 3 exerts instead of 2, that's just more damage, right? So we want that. And then this is obviously first lab, whatever. And then Act 4, we're going to be kind of just like investing into more things. Here we want Warcries cannot exert travel skills. This is so that when you're leap slamming, you're not using up your Intimidating Cry exerts, and you're going to use it for Sunder. So another portion, I decided to take this axe wheel. It's optional, up to you whether or not you want to go for this axe wheel or you want to go down here for, say, the 4 points and then do an extra point in the mastery for grant 2 rage on hit with axes. I think rage is not really good until you invest into it. And with this build, it's not a hit-based build. It's going to be a bleed build. I plan on not investing into rage, right? So I don't really care about that, and I want these 4 nodes because I'm actually going to keep them in the end game for Chieftain. You could argue that I could just respec because of all the gold and whatever. There is a big respec in Act 10, but I just decided to do it this way. So that's kind of my thoughts around that. I went 1 point down here. Really, like, this could be shifted to up here, for instance, and you take Juggernaut, like, you know, relatively quickly. You're getting a little bit of armor and life. And then in Act 5, we're going to be going for Juggernaut anyway. And then we're going to be going down here, grabbing a little bit more life. And then all this Warcry buff effect stuff. We definitely want all this. And basically, we're just going to be getting like a shitload of increased movement speed. And we're kind of just speccing into this. There's really no reason to spec into this right now. But we're just going to take it because once we hit Blood Magic territory in Act 7, we're going to be using our piano Warcry setup, right? So Act 5, we're grabbing a little bit of Warcry stuff. We're heading towards, you know, max res, but we're really trying to head towards these nodes. In Act 6, we're taking more Warcry buff stuff. We're taking Unwavering Stance. You could take this sooner if you're really scared about stuns and stuff. I just like, we're going to do enough damage that I'm not really super scared about that. And heading down, and then in Act 7 is when we do the Blood Magic swap. So Blood Magic is going to be, you know, taking some auras out, and we're only going to be using Pride with Eternal Blessing. And then we're going to start scaling into bleed a little bit, right? And we're going to be getting this Warcry speed so that our Warcries are not pain to use. They're still not going to be great, but we're going to have urgent orders linked with like 3 Warcries, so it'll be decent. Yeah, Act 8, we're going to be going for more health, obviously. Health, because we're Blood Magic now, so we just kind of want to stack as much health as we can because, you know, we're using all of our skills with life. So now we're going to scale into bleed more, and this is where it kind of gets nice. We're getting, you know, the bleed mastery, attacks cause bleeding, and 25% chance to aggravate bleeding on targets you hit with exerted attacks. So the whole idea is we're just using exerts for most of our damage, right? So now we're getting, you know, some bleed chance. Cool, we're not fully into bleed yet at Act 9. We're just sort of scaling into it. getting to where we need to be on the tree. So Act 10 is a bit of a respec, and I'll do a comparison here just to show you guys what's kind of going on. So yeah, for Cruel Lab, also we took Warcries have infinite power. This is so that anytime we're using Enduring Cry, Ancestral Cry, whatever, we're getting like the full buffs for it. So yes, it's going to be pretty nice though with the respec with gold. It's only going to be like what, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 and then 15 nodes to respec. So it's not going to be bad. You're going to have some regrets by Act 9, and you can also use gold if you want. So we're going to be scaling more into bleed. We need more attack chance to bleed because we want to get to 100%. We're going to grab all these bleed nodes down here. The duration is going to be nice because it's just going to give us more damage uptime. And then we're going to go 1 endurance charge, the other endurance charge. So now we have 5 endurance charges, which is pretty big. And yeah, we're going to respec kind of the melee damage portion and go into like life and armor. And you can also drop versatility a lot quicker, but getting dexterity and intelligence is kind of hard on a marauder. So, I mean, it just depends on whenever you can drop these. Then I would probably drop them. And then you can invest otherwise. Here I'm going to grab like Soul of Steel for +1 max res, some flat armor and Ellie res. Like, you know, it's not the best thing to grab, but it's something to grab, and it's fine to grab it. We just kind of need that max res early on for Chieftain. And once we hit, you know, Act 10, we're going to be taking the modifiers to maximum fire resistance, also apply to max cold and lightning. So this is going to give us big sustain. My resistances are screwed here, so you're not going to see it. But yeah, we'll have like 80 max res pretty much all, which is nice. Yeah, so that's Act 10, little respec action. And then once you're like early maps, I think I put it, yeah, like level 80-ish, right? I'll do like a early maps comparison to Act 10. So we're going to be refunding this 1 strength node and just grabbing more life and armor. It's just like a pathing thing. You might as well. And then we're going to take the mastery for +1 max Ellie res when we are using armor on all of our pieces of gear, which is what I plan on doing. I plan on doing hybrid pieces though, so you can get spell suppression. Like later on in the game, like spell suppression is going to make this build pretty damn tanky. And we're going to grab a jewel slot, hopefully have something to just slot life into this and maybe a little bit of damage. You're going to go for, you know, the +2 max Ellie res because obviously we're getting this now. So we're getting, you know, +3 max res to everything. So that's a huge thing to grab. And then we're going to grab, you know, the life mastery for 15% if you can do it. If you can't do this node, then it is what it is. But we get, you know, pretty substantial amount of life. Another jewel socket if you want it, kind of thing. And then another jewel socket here. Going pathing, we're going to grab Constitution for even more life because we're blood magic, so we just want more life, right? And so there, once you get into like late-ish maps, like 80 to 90 is really like your best transitional point in this build, and where you start to actually get pretty tanky and also, you know, just having more armor. So the whole comparison with this one is like if I do this to late maps, you'll see we're going into, you know, more life, and also a jewel socket as well as an endurance charge. So the endurance charge is really important. I kind of wish we didn't have to path this way. I would rather path like over here to reduce life and cost of skills, and then kind of like whatever. It's not worth it to do this because you're losing out on the endurance charge, excuse me, and the jewel slot. So we really want to go for iron reflexes though, because this gives us a lot of armor. We're going to be using armor evasion bases, so we're actually going to be getting a pretty substantial amount of armor and evasion. You know, for the helmet and stuff, you can actually, now that we don't have fizz damage taken as Ellie as a priority, you could do like armor and evasion and get a really big amount of flat armor and stuff out of it. Yeah, I think Chieftain's going to be really good late game as opposed to early game, just for its survivability. But yeah, we're going to grab the Frenzy Charge as well, Iron Reflexes as well, and I took this Life Node out of here to add into something else. I can't remember. I think it was the Frenzy Charge. But yeah, so now like we're getting into sort of the end game. This is sort of what I expect my character to be from like 90 to 100 sort of deal. I guess it's only 92. Sorry, end game is 100. So 100 is like where you get your spell suppression cap and stuff, which is a little bit of a stretch. I kind of wish we could do it sooner. There are things we could drop instead for spell suppression if we find that we're struggling. Obviously, once we hit, you know, spell suppression, our max hits go up quite a substantial amount, like almost double. So you could argue that you should probably like not take all this life and endurance charge and jewel slot and go straight into suppression. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys, and that's probably what I might do as well, but I'm going to leave this as framework anyway. And yeah, it's pretty much like your own discretion of what you want to do. And it's when you start getting your spell suppression gear, you know, like 90-ish, you should start getting like decent like spell suppression gear from Expedition if you plan to do that. And yeah, so that's kind of the whole leveling and progression process. And now we're totally into bleed, and we're using Earthquake for our big damage. Alrighty, so let's go over skills just real quick, just so I can show you kind of the progression. We lost Warbanner as a reservation thing. Normally it was Blood and Sand and Warbanner, but now you're going to use Vitality, and you actually just get more recovery. So how is that bad, right? Pretty good. So we're going to use Blood and Sand for the extra damage, and then obviously that Mastery is going to give us even more damage, right? And then Warbanner, we can drop this on bosses after we've gotten 50 Valor. Gives us a pretty good amount of damage, so that's nice. And we're going to go Ground Slam, Ruthless, Chance to Bleed, and then we're going to go scale into Sunder with kind of the same things. I decided to go Chance to Bleed with Ruthless. You could do things like faster attacks or momentum instead of Chance to Bleed. I just did this because why not? I mean, it's just more damage, right? There's really not a better way to do anything. It's just if you want to go faster, I would probably use faster attacks or momentum instead. Intimidating Cry is going to be our crutch for this build. This is where we're going to get all of our damage. We're going to get some good movement speed from it as well. So Act 2, you know, same type of auras. We're going to use Herald of Ash, though. We're going to introduce this into our aura setup. You're going to need to use a Mana Flask, definitely. And then movement skills, we want to do Leap Slam, faster attacks. This is also supposed to be in Act 1. Yeah, I have Leap Slam, but I didn't have faster attacks. And normally you're going to be socket starved, so that's kind of why I left it out. But you can do this setup. And then Sunder is going to be Ruthless. Melee physical damage you get in Act 2, so you can slot that in instead of Chance to Bleed. We're not really scaling bleed. We're doing more so hits in the early game, so you just kind of want to go for this gem instead. So we're going to use this setup as a 3-link, and then Intimidating Cry for the double exerts, and Blood Rage is also going to be used so that you can get like 3 frenzy charges. So the idea when you get to a boss is you're going to have 3 frenzy charges. You're going to Intimidate Cry, all the adds plus the boss, get max power, and then you're going to drop your banner and swing away, and you're going to do like insane damage. Like even before, like in patch 3.24, I was like 3-hitting Weaver and stuff. Like Act 2 is kind of a joke once you get everything set up. And then Act 3, we're going to drop Herald of Ash and then go Pride because it's just 100% like more damage. And then obviously keep banner. We're going to do the same movement skills. We're going to introduce vulnerability into the mix. You don't need to use this a whole lot. I mean, you can use it on strong targets, bosses and stuff. But yeah, Sunder, same setup. Buy Earthquake and level this gem. It'll just be much better when you go to make the swap. You'll be like up to par with your gem level instead of like 2 or 3 levels under what you should be. Act 4, we're going to go for, you know, the same type of stuff. We've got Vitality, which is nice for that little bit of recovery. And Warbanner, same movement skills, same curse. Basically same everything. And now Act 4 is when you get Fist of War. So you want to put Fist of War in because this is actually big damage for an initial slam. So the idea is when you Intimidate and Cry and then slam for the first time, Fist of War is going to be active and it's going to do a shitload of damage. Like I shit you not, it's big fucking damage. You just have to play your timings right and use Intimidating Cry to its full potential. And 3 slams as well, like getting 3 exerts instead of 2. I think you can actually get a Fist of War on the first one. You'll not have Fist of War on the second one, and then on the third hit, you'll actually have Fist of War again. So that's actually pretty much double the damage that you would have been able to do otherwise before, right? So anyway, keep progressing. Act 5, similar stuff. I mean, it's all the same, like auras and stuff like that. This is okay. Act 6 is going to be, I think, just all the same stuff. We pretty much just keep the same setup until we get to Act 7. So this is when we make our blood magic swap, and then we do Pride with Eternal Blessing. So if you don't know how Eternal Blessing works, basically you only have 1 aura that you can use, and any other aura that you do use, it'll reserve your life now because you are blood magic, right? So you can do things like precision on your life if you want. You could even do the vitality setup on life if you want for just some more recovery. And precision and vitality, as well as clarity, are those 3 auras that don't have a percentage of like now life that you would have to reserve. It's actually only a number. So if it suits you and if it's not a lot and if it's not painful for you, definitely do like vitality with this sort of setup. But you're going to go for this, and Pride is basically a free aura. So we're going to use Warbanner, the same thing, same movement skills, same curse. And now we're introducing the Warcries, and yes, it is a piano build because we're going to be using 3 different Warcries linked with more duration. So you could argue that instead of more duration, you'd want to put Urgent Orders in here because you get the Warcry speed, and then once you get a 5 link, then you could put more duration in, right? So we're going to still be using Blood Rage. Now we're going to be using Cast when Damage Taken Molten Shell. We're going to be swapping out Molten Shell later for Immortal Call, just because once our Endurance Charge generation is enough, we don't care about Molten Shell. Because Molten Shell's really only good if you have a lot of armor, and we don't really have a lot of armor until late in the game. And then Sunder, same setup, right? So now Act 8 to 10, it's roughly like whenever you want to swap, right? It's like kind of the same for all of these acts. You can stay, you know, hit based and like kind of just do a little bit of bleed damage if you want. Obviously, we get all the same things. Warcry's cool. I put more duration in it. It's just to have more duration of these buffs, but you can scale out of whatever you want. Put the speed. It might make it more comfortable for you. If you don't mind being a little bit slower, then maybe do more duration so your buffs and you don't have to cast them as often. Blood Rage, cast when damage taken, Molten Shell, same thing. And then I've got some setups here, whether or not you want to play Bleed, or if you want to play Earthquake instead of Sunder. So Sunder without, you know, the Bleed is going to be this setup. And then Sunder with Bleed is going to be Fist of War, Volatility, and Ruthless. You could take Ruthless out and put Chance to Bleed if you want for even more bleed damage. It's up to you. It's kind of flexible, really. The 5 link is going to have Fortify in the mix. So Fortify is, you know, obviously a good defensive layer. So if you do happen to drop a 5 link in the campaign, definitely put Fortify in. And so Sunder Bleed with a 5 link this time is going to have Fortify as well, because it's just super good for defense, and it also gives us damage on our main skill. Earthquake, we can go Bleed if we want. We can do Volatility, Fist of War, and melee physical damage. Melee physical damage can probably be swapped out for Brutality. I'm not sure. I think this is probably the best thing to use, though. I think it gives more damage for melee fizz. And then 5 link with Bleed, you can do Fist of War, melee fizz damage, Fortify. Same like sort of methodology for swapping or whatever. And then this is once you finally get into maps. I also put all the gear, like which pieces of gear you want to have things socketed. It's pretty flexible because there's not a lot of socket pressure on this build, and you can probably add more to it. I opted for, when doing the curse, like vulnerability, I have it manual casted. You can actually go for an additional Warcry if you want and do Rallying Cry, which will actually cast this when you hit. So it just depends on your playstyle. I actually don't mind doing the manual curse, like vulnerability on a boss and stuff. And I kind of don't want to press a 4th Warcry because it just makes it super clunky. Although 3 is still pretty clunky, but 2 would be a sweet spot for me if I could make the build work with 2. But just the amount of damage you get. If you want more damage and if you want curse on hit, definitely go Rallying Cry with vulnerability. It's just now, like your setup, you're gonna have to have it like 6 linked and have Rallying Cry in that, and that might be what I do later on. But for now, I have like a 5 link with all these with Urgent Orders and more duration. If I could add Rallying Cry in here, cool, but like on a League Start scenario, like I might not have a 6 link, so I'm gonna keep it the way I kind of got it. And then obviously War Banner, we're still gonna use dropping and getting lots of damage. Pride, Eternal Blessing, same deal. Now Blood Rage, I'm gonna put with automation, because it's just gonna be much easier. You don't have to press the button. You don't want automation being leveled because it'll cast Blood Rage more often than it needs to be. I would rather it just cast it when it, like, you know, it needs to be, but not like the base duration is 8.8 seconds and the cooldown time is 1 second. So, you know, like you don't need to level anything. You don't need to put quality in any of these gems. You just throw this in and then it's good to go and you never have to think about it. And then cast when damage taken. This is when I actually scale into the Immortal Call setup, because Immortal Call is kind of busted with all the endurance charge changes and just having endurance charges all the time. So like Enduring Cry, I think the cooldown is like roughly like 5 seconds on this build. I'm probably going to do Lab to invest in quality for the Warcries, like probably just for Enduring, because Enduring is pretty much the most important one for like cooldown recovery rate, because we're going to be expending endurance charges all the time. And you kind of want endurance charges while you have Immortal Call as well. But yeah, like basically our uptime on Immortal Call is going to be like over 50%. So that's big mitigation for Chieftain. So that's why I'm deciding to use it. More duration is going to be fun too. And I have it on cast when damage taken. You could argue you want to do it on automation, but the whole methodology behind doing cast when damage taken is when I'm taking a hit that I really think is going to kill me, I want this to pop, and that's all. That's really all it is. And, you know, getting hit when it's on automation too, you're expending endurance charges that you would have through your regular mapping rotation. Say you stop and loot and it expends your endurance charges every like 3 seconds. It's hard to uptime that unless you're like a jug. But like, yeah, basically it's just so that it uses the endurance charges when I'm taking damage, which is when I want to use them. And otherwise I will have like 5 endurance charges walking around all the time. So that's kind of the whole scope of that. But this is going to be your setup for 5-link with obviously the Tukohama Ascendancy, which is a pseudo 6-link, because we're getting that Fist of War for free, right? Make sure it is in your body armor, because if it's not in your body armor, you do not get the benefits of Fist of War. So we're going to do Earthquake, Volatility, Melee Fizz. Auto Exertion is supposed to be Over Exertion. I've also accounted for this in the config. I put 64% more damage. You're wondering how I got this value. It is 18% more damage per Warcry, so 3 Warcries, and then 10% on top of that, just that's in the gem. So we're going to be doing that. And this is going to be, you know, the 5-link setup. We're going to have the Fortify. It's going to be good. And then the 6-link setup, we're just going to be adding Brutality for even more fizz damage. So this is kind of what I'm looking at. I may change some things. Less duration looks kind of fun to use because obviously your Aftershock, it takes less time to like the enemy. So that can also be nice. But yeah, all in all, this is kind of the setup I'm running with. If you want to do the Rallying Cry vulnerability thing, I don't think that that's a bad idea, because like also with overexertion, right, you're going to be getting that 18% more damage. So it just depends on how I feel about it. And if I get a 6-link, I will probably transition into putting it in here, right? Because there's not many like socket pressure in this build. Like there's really not that much. You know, obviously the boots are full here. The gloves have 1 slot free. The helmet has 1 slot free, so you can like kind of mix and match things how you want. But this is sort of like what I did for a league start scenario. And you know, having the recovery too, like on some of the gear, I tried to opt for like spell suppression and also increased life regeneration rate. If you think that the life regeneration rate is unethical, by all means remove it and see what your recovery is. But for me, like 2800 life regen on a chieftain looks pretty spicy. Decent max hits. If I enable more Immortal Call, it goes up a considerable amount. It's 92k max fizz hit now. So to be like kind of transparent too, I want to go into say the calcs, and we'll look at the actual like war cries and their kind of their cooldowns and stuff. Enduring Cry, like this is with quality too, so you got to take that into consideration. We're trying to get quality on our war cries because the CDR is just going to be so much comfortable for your overall playing. So if that means farming lab for a little bit, like whatever, it is what it is. But our skill cooldown is going to be 4.7 seconds, basically. So, you know, casting Enduring Cry every 5 seconds is pretty damn fast, in my opinion. And you're going to be getting full endurance charges every single time, right? So every 5 seconds, we are guaranteed like 5 endurance charges. So just keep that in mind as I'm explaining this. And then skill duration, 8.3 seconds. So we're way above any like duration that we would need to keep our uptime on our life regeneration, which is like A+ for Chieftain. We really want that, right? So then Seismic Cry, you know, skill cooldown, same kind of deal, has the same buff. So we're going to be getting this armor all the time. And then Ancestral Cry, same cooldown, you know, like same uptime on damage and stuff, or not damage, on buff effect. So yeah, looks pretty good, right? And then if we go to Immortal Call setup, I actually have to enable Immortal Call for it to show up. I usually disable Immortal Call just because it shows a more accurate representation of what your max hit is, like without the buff active. So now we've got Immortal Call up here, and you can see the skill cooldown is 2.5 seconds, and the duration is 3 seconds. So a 3-second Immortal Call is actually pretty good. If you're taking damage, and if you take like simultaneously a bunch of damaging hits, it'll be nice because cast from damage taken will proc this, and for 3 seconds you have a pretty good window to escape danger, essentially. So skilled cooldown is 2.5 seconds though, so that means whenever that 3 seconds ends with the buff, you need to wait 2.5 seconds before you can actually use Immortal Call again, right? So I don't know how this is going to feel with the Enduring Cry setup, like getting our endurance charges through it. I don't know if this is going to be too quick, because maybe I won't be able to sustain the amount of endurance charges I need for the buff. But yeah, basically I'm going with this, and I think the uptime being 54% is actually pretty big. especially these max hits, man. Like if I Immortal Call, like there's not too much that can kill me through 92k max fizz hit, right? So that's kind of the premise of all that stuff, defense wise. I think Chieftain's probably a better defensive option than a lot of Ascendancies this league. Jug is going to be definitely way more defensive if you're going to use the Immortal Call setup, because Jug just gets max endurance charges every time he's hit, basically, right? So pretty. And if you guys made it to the end, man, thank you for watching. As always, thank you. This is just going to be something I'm going to try. I'm not going to say it's going to be good. I'm not trying to convince you to do it. I'm just laying out what I'm doing, and if you kind of want to try it with me, then cool. But I'll be streaming this for sure. League Start, I'll be streaming the whole process, doing like day 1, 2, 3 updates kind of thing. Yeah, that's basically it, guys. Thanks for watching. Sorry about the whole like new player sort of trying to like bog you down with a shitload of information about progression, but I feel like it's worth it for a lot of people, so I felt like I should include it. Anyway, thanks, guys. Cheers, bye.